On a primeval river in the heart of Africa lives the legend of a creature called Mokele-mbembe. Like the Loch Ness Monster, it's awesome and mysterious. But this is no sea serpent. This brute is no illusion. It's a dinosaur. Explorers have ventured into Africa, the dark continent, in search of this elusive beast. Africa, over 200 million years ago. In a vast sun-baked desert, a tiny oasis gives shelter to a host of prehistoric creatures. Here, insects rule the world. Through the eyes of a dragonfly, this world is gigantic. The only other permanent residents, primitive amphibians and frogs, congregate in a pool, the only water for hundreds of miles. Most of the time, it's a sanctuary, but once in a while, terror strikes. Today, this long-forgotten refuge has disappeared, eaten away by the ravages of time. Sprawled over 345,000 square miles, this vast wasteland is now known as the Karoo Basin in South Africa. Here in 1854, paleontologists uncovered the first dinosaur ever found south of the equator. It was also one of the earliest dinosaurs to walk the land. Called Massospondylus, scientists disagree exactly when it lived, with estimates ranging from 220 to 200 million years ago on the Triassic-Jurassic boundary. 13 feet long, this plant eater stood on its hind legs to graze in trees using its tail for support. Although first discovered in the Karoo Basin, Massospondylus was not unique to Africa. When it lived, the world was a very different place.
If you were a dinosaur in the early days in the Triassic in Africa, you could walk to South America, you could walk to New Mexico, you could walk to Scotland, you could walk across Russia and down to India. It was all one place.
At the beginning of the Triassic 245 million years ago, the Earth was one half water and the other half land. All of the continents were joined together in a single landmass called Pangea. Africa lay in the middle, just below the equator. Because most of the continent was landlocked, the climate was very hot and very dry. South Africa was a desert. A torrid wind blew constantly across an endless sea of sand, erasing any hint of life. Here, a dinosaur would leave no footprints, and the desert offer little shelter. But then, as now, small pockets of vegetation sprouted around the occasional watering hole. A primeval paradise in a bleak and inhospitable world would help forge the destiny of Massospondylus. A nomadic dinosaur, Masaspondylus was built for long, arduous travel across great expanses of desert. Like a camel, it stored food and water in its body until it reached the next oasis. Well suited to its environment, Masaspondylus was lean and compact, but it had a telltale feature. Its head was tiny. Roger Smith of the Cape Town Museum thinks this dinosaur was the blueprint for the largest land animals that ever lived.
Well, this is a skull of Masaspondylus. It's a small, dainty dinosaur with large eye sockets. And here the row of small teeth, leaf-eating teeth. As evolution progressed, some of them became smaller, but others gave rise to the large, plant-eating herbivorous sauropods.
205 million years ago, the Earth cracked and molten lava poured out of its interior, signaling the coming of a new age, the Jurassic period. Unable to adapt to the changing times, Masaspondylus was rapidly disappearing. Another dinosaur was taking its place on the African plains, but in size, this plant eater was a monster. In 1907, a German mining engineer prospecting for minerals in East Africa stumbled upon the unexpected. Littering a site called Tendaguru in what is now Tanzania was the greatest collection of dinosaur bones to ever come out of Africa. The discovery launched the largest expedition of any kind in history. The dig ranged over 2 square miles and took over 5 years to complete. The Germans employed 170 native laborers in the first season. By the 5th year, the number had risen to 500. Accompanied by their families, the workers at Tendaguru became a city unto themselves, reaching a staggering 900 people in all. By the time the expedition had ended, 250 tons of fossils had been unearthed. In an unending stream, natives bearing 5,000 crates of bones snaked their way through the bush on an arduous 4-day trek to the coast. From there, the bones were shipped to the Humboldt Museum in Berlin, Germany. Over a decade later, the bones would reveal a total of 9 new species of dinosaur. Their skeletons created a sensation when they were first exhibited in 1920. But one in particular left the scientific world in awe, and today it is still a subject of fascination for paleontologist Oliver Rauhoot.
This dinosaur was first found as the largest land animal the world had ever seen. Still today, this is the largest complete dinosaur skeleton ever found.
One of the largest, longest, and possibly heaviest dinosaurs ever to walk the land, this huge plant-eating sauropod is named arm lizard, Brachiosaurus. Reinforced by limb girders and supported by pillar-like legs, Brachiosaurus resembled a gigantic giraffe. It roamed Africa 150 million years ago at the end of the Jurassic period. The world it lived in was no longer a desert. The climate had changed. For the first time, sand dunes sprouted plants nurtured by the coming and going of seasons. In spring, when it rained, Brachiosaurus fed on the leaves that grew in the burgeoning forests of conifers and hardwoods. But in the summer, when it was dry, food was not so plentiful. So how did Brachiosaurus not only survive, but flourish?
They flourished because these huge, long-necked animals could reach up high into the canopy and feed on the last leaves left in the summer, or if they had to, push over the trees with their great weight and rip up the trunks, as elephants do today. Being huge, being tall, being very strong is an adaptive necessity if the summers are bad.
Brachiosaurus dominated the Jurassic Plains. But Africa wasn't their only playground. In 1877, bones of another Brachiosaurus were dug up 11,000 miles west of Tendaguru in the Badlands of Colorado. 150 million years ago, Brachiosaurus was king of the world. But something was about to happen that would make its empire crumble. The great supercontinent of Pangea began to break up. As the land masses across the globe pulled in separate directions, rifts appeared in the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. These changes ushered in the Cretaceous period 142 million years ago.
During the Cretaceous, Africa split off from all the other continents, split off from Europe, split off from North America, split off at the top from South America. It became a dinosaur island with its own unique adaptive inventions.
Now isolated, Africa would become home to a breed of dinosaurs that would rival the weirdest and meanest the world has ever seen. Five times a day, a chant echoes through an ancient village, calling Muslims to prayer. Sandwiched between Algeria and Libya on the north coast of Africa lies the Arab country of Tunisia. These long-abandoned dwellings cling precariously to the steep mountainside. Little did their creators know that this ancient land was once ruled by dinosaurs with a flair for the bizarre. And one creature in particular.
African dinosaurs in the Cretaceous produced unusual things: a sea-going, fish-killing, meat-eating dinosaur, a combination of Free Willy and T-Rex.
In 1998, a team of dinosaur hunters from England's Bristol University came here to find this elusive beast. They traveled 5 long days and nights and covered 4,000 miles to reach this remote outpost. To the town of Tatooine, which lies on the edge of the Sahara Desert. Before their journey is over, they will travel further into the unknown and back in time. In 1912, German paleontologist Ernst Stromer led a team into Egypt's western desert. At a place called the Bahariya oasis, he unearthed the skeleton of what looked like a monster. He named it Spinosaurus, meaning thorn lizard, after the sail that was over 5 feet tall and stuck up from its back. A 2-legged predator, it was 49 feet long and weighed 4 tons. But little else is known of this giant from North Africa. In 1944, a World War II bombing raid on Germany destroyed the few known bones of Spinosaurus. To this day, no one has discovered another. But the team from Bristol University are rising to the challenge.
See those sandstone layers up there, guys? That's where the bones are going to be. I reckon, guys, if all these channels have got bones in, one of you lot's going to have to walk home.
Although Spinosaurus was found in Egypt, fragments have surfaced all across North Africa.
In Africa, this kind of dinosaur was around for millions of years, and at various times, Spinosaurs were the most common, the largest of the predators.
Spinosaurus may have been common, but its fossils are hard to find. Still, expedition organizer Mike Benton remains optimistic.
I came to Tunisia last year. We were invited by the Tunisian paleontologists and geologists. They brought us around a lot of dinosaur sites, and this was the most amazing. Normally you expect to have to dig up bones with a huge amount of effort, but here we were tripping up over them. They were everywhere.
Thousands of bones from a vast variety of dinosaurs litter an area of 10 square miles, a scale the team have never before encountered.
The sheer number of bones in this small site is absolutely staggering. There's a whole range of bones of a large sauropod, plant-eating dinosaur.
But it's not just bones that are preserved here. Geologist Clive Truman has found evidence of how the climate of the desert has changed in 100 million years.
This fossil tree trunk has tree rings, and this tells us that the climate was seasonal because the tree grew more in a wetter part of the year than in a drier part of the year. I suppose if you wanted an idea of what the place looked like, you could say it was the Florida Everglades meets the Mississippi Delta.
Time traveler going back to the Cretaceous wouldn't recognize Tunisia. In spring, the delta turned lush and green and swollen by rains. A river coursed its way through a forest of evergreens. Hungry for tender new shoots to feed on, herds of plant-eating dinosaurs converged on the banks, while crocodiles lazed in the sun or scurried to the water for a meal. Here, primitive turtles mingled with armored fish and freshwater sharks 4 feet long. The ancient delta has long since vanished, but French paleontologist Eric Bouffetot thinks the remains of a Spinosaurus might still be there.
This is the kind of Spinosaurus specimens that have been found in recent years. This is a jaw fragment from Morocco, and it shows the tooth sockets here. And since we arrived here in Tunisia, we've already found this fossil, which also is a jaw fragment and also shows the tooth sockets here.
A jawbone is a promising start, but Eric hopes to find more of Spinosaurus. After a day of digging, the team uncovers a fossil that looks small, but its implications are colossal.
This is part of a rib here, and you can see the cross-section is absolutely huge. So this proves we've got a massive animal here.
But Dave Martil and Shamir Bouaziz from the University of Sfax in Tunisia have found something even more tantalizing. It may well be a Spinosaurus tooth. Next day at base camp, the team takes time out to explore the purpose of Spinosaurus's most bizarre feature, the large sail on its back.
The Spinosaurus has this great huge back, I reckon that its function was probably sexual.
This was full of blood vessels and could be used to control the temperature of the animal, the body temperature.
That's a radiator, blood going through.
Or the
giving
other
off
way
heat.
around on a cold morning, it would have warmed up perhaps.
You have to remember these sail-backed animals are living side by side with others with no sails.
The sail could have been brightly colored to attract a mate, or acted like a solar heating panel to warm it up and like a radiator to cool it down. Or maybe it stored fat when food was scarce, like a camel's hump. To know more, the team needed to find more. The discovery of more Spinosaurus teeth hints that things are starting to fit together.
Some of the teeth we find here fit this jaw perfectly well. And the interesting thing about them is that they are unlike those of normal flesh-eating dinosaurs. They are not made for slicing meat, in fact. They are rounded and conical, and actually they look like the teeth of crocodiles.
These piercing cone-shaped teeth suggest that, like crocodiles, Spinosaurus had a taste for big freshwater game. Seizing a slippery fish with a mouthful of daggers was an easy catch. Although Spinosaurus tops their agenda, team members are also finding tiny fragments of a host of other creatures. One by one, they're piecing together the clues to a tragic day in Tunisia over 100 million years ago. The river seemed tranquil. Miles away, disaster was brewing. A torrent of seasonal rain struck without warning. Caught off guard, hundreds of unwary dinosaurs were swept away. Torn apart by the deluge, their broken bodies were strewn across the ancient floodplain. This distant tragedy dashes all hopes of finding a complete skeleton of Spinosaurus. But Dave Martill still manages to get lucky.
We've just found this amazing toe bone. It's probably from one of the predatory dinosaurs. It might be from Spinosaurus. Now, when we begin to reconstruct Spinosaurus, we can start from the toes upwards.
The expedition draws to a close, Spinosaurus remains elusive. Dave Martill thinks he knows why.
Amongst all the dinosaur bones that are in this bone bed, we're finding a lot of these little fish teeth. So many of them that I can only think that the rivers here must have been absolutely teeming with fish. But you know, there are also teeth of a big predator dinosaur that could quite likely have been feeding on Spinosaurus. This is a tooth of the largest meat-eating dinosaur in Africa. This is a tooth of Carcharodontosaurus.
Spinosaurus may have been one of the biggest predators to roam the continent. But when this killer was on its tail, it ran for its life. The Sahara Desert is 3 million square miles of emptiness. A land of extremes. The blistering sun, exhausting heat, and inhospitable terrain make even the hardiest run for cover. Yet in 1995, an expedition crosses the salt flats of southern Morocco to reach this barren desert. Paul Serino, a paleontologist from the University of Chicago, has been here before.
We go to the Sahara because it's a fantastic place where you can walk over ground that's never been walked over by a team, rich in fossils, and ready to tell you about a world of dinosaurs that had become separated and had evolved into its own.
It took him almost a year to organize this venture and 4 weeks to finally get here. And like others before him, he too is after Spinosaurus. Armed with a geological survey of southern Morocco, the team's first port of call is a place called Anoual in the Atlas Mountains. The foothills of the Atlas are nearly 100 million years old. So team member Hans Larsson and Paul Serino check the sediment to see if any dinosaurs are buried here.
One of the fastest ways to tell what kind of sediment you're dealing with is just to taste it and chew it for a while.
Because with just 1 or 2 bites, you can determine how much grit is in a piece of sediment. It's a little gritty, but very, very, very slight.
Just a touch of salt.
Sediment reveals whether this land was once a forest, riverbed, or desert. This soil is embedded with gypsum, a mineral that originates in salt lakes. When the water dries up, gypsum remains.
One down the hill is almost a meter thick, and that's the most gypsum I've ever seen in my life.
100 million years ago, every lake and swamp for miles around would have been salty and unfit to drink. For a dinosaur, this was off limits. The chances of the team finding any fossils here was hopeless. Next, they set their sights on a region in southern Morocco called the Kem-Kem. Close to the Algerian border, temperatures here soar to 130 degrees. When the sun is highest and the humidity lowest, life shrinks from the heat. Undaunted by this hardship, the team combed the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. Just as they were about to call it quits, their luck changed.
Well, the morning had started out on a wrong foot. Literally, one of my boots had been plunged into water, and so we opened up the truck, and it was time to go prospecting, and I decided to prospect in one boot and one sandal. And I said to Jeff, I said, oh, I'll meet you at the truck, 'cause I'm going to go the long way around. It's easier to get down.
Gabrielle, all of a sudden, didn't come back for lunch on time, and we got very worried.
On the way, I stumbled over an incredible find. At the time, I didn't know it.
At the spot where Gabrielle Lyon made her discovery, the team uncovered a cache of bones. One bone in particular excited them. Several feet long, it looked like a spike from the sail of Spinosaurus. Finally, one night in camp, Serino began putting the pieces together.
I picked up the first fragment and put it right into place. As the hours passed, my eyes were just really, I just couldn't believe what was being assembled in front of me.
An expert at reconstructing dinosaurs, Serino was in for a shock. The bone didn't belong to Spinosaurus. It was the shoulder blade of a totally new dinosaur. Paul christened it Deltadromeus, meaning Delta Runner. A 35-foot killer with short arms and long legs, it was built for outrunning its prey at top speed. Deltadromeus lived 70 million years ago during the late Cretaceous, when the arid desert of Morocco was a semi-tropical paradise. Here, the forest pulsated with life as tall tree ferns lining the banks of a river attracted scores of hungry plant eaters. And where there was prey, danger was everywhere. It seems Deltadromeus wasn't the only carnivore that hunted here. Everywhere Serino and his team went, giant shark-like teeth kept cropping up. Somewhere out there, an unknown killer was lying in wait for the team.
Africa is a great frontier. I know of no other place that has as rich and as widely exposed the treasures of the past, and yet so little of it known.
Hunting for bones in the Sahara is like looking for a needle in a haystack the size of North America. After 8 weeks in the desert, the team was exhausted. The trip had been grueling, but also rewarding. And it wasn't over yet.
We still had a couple days left in the field. We moved to one of the last areas we had to look. This time I was the lucky one, and it was totally unpredictable. I saw an area of outcrop. I walked towards it, and I walked over and I saw in front of me a pile of bones, fragments.
Perched precariously on the edge of a steep outcrop, the team start to unearth Serino's chance discovery.
Look at this. Have you guys seen the teeth? This is incredible. 1, 2, 3. There's a replacing tooth here. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
I mean, it wouldn't have really had more than 14 teeth.
Mm-hmm. You got the whole jaw.
6, 8.
Serino had stumbled on what was to become one of the most important and terrifying dinosaurs that Africa had ever spawned. Finding it was one thing. Getting the half-a-ton slab of rock back to the truck was another. But the effort was worth it. In 1996, Paul Serino introduced the world to his new discovery. At 5 feet in length, its skull was not only the biggest, but the most complete ever found in Africa. It belonged to Carcharodontosaurus, meaning shark-toothed reptile. 50 feet of sinew on 2 powerful hind legs, it had unrivaled speed and acceleration. Its weapon of choice was its awesome jaw. Carcharodontosaurus was way ahead of the competition. Although it resembled a tyrannosaur, it was also one of a kind.
Africa shows how evolution really doesn't and can't operate to produce the same forms over time when you isolate them. Carcharodontosaurus, for example, a very large dinosaur in Africa, essentially reaching the same size as Tyrannosaurus, but from a totally different line of dinosaurs. That's an example of evolution in isolation.
And this isolation was to become absolute, as Africa's dinosaurs became cut off from each other, as well as from the rest of the world. In time, this would produce a collection of beasts unlike anywhere else on Earth. Life for the dinosaurs of Africa was always fierce, each competing to be top of the food chain. Because this position was so precarious, any subtle changes in the environment could have massive effects. A change took place in Africa that was enormous.
During the late Cretaceous, sea levels all over the world rose somewhat, and as a result, places like North America were split in two by shallow seas. This also happened in Africa, so Northern Africa was separated somewhat from Southern Africa, which means the animals in those two places were separated from each other as well.
Sea waters flooded in from east to west, splitting the continent in two. In the sea, some animals migrated between the two oceans, causing a dramatic mix of species. But on land, the African dinosaurs were now cut off from one another. For paleontologist Billy de Klerk, the Grahamstown Museum in South Africa, this isolation opened up yet another fascinating chapter in dinosaur evolution. In the southernmost region of South Africa lies a 1,000 square mile area known as the Kirkwood Formation. Here, the rocks preserve a record of life dating back to the Cretaceous period 135 million years ago.
Of course, the vegetation would have been marginally different. We didn't have, in those days, the succulent flowering plants around. We did have, though, big trees in the form of yellowwoods. Here's a fossil yellowwood. It's about 135 million-year-old rock now. And that type of tree is still growing here in southern Africa today. All of this tells us that Africa has remained stable over these millions of years until the present day.
Today, Africa is as wild and abandoned as it was 135 million years ago. Here, it is kill or be killed. Survival comes only to the fittest. Top of the food chain, a solitary meat eater stalks a docile plant eater, its unsuspecting prey, while the world's largest land animals graze in herds, much like huge sauropods had millions of years before. In the Shamwari Game Reserve, finding the bones of big dinosaurs is not uncommon. But a discovery here in 1997 hinted that Africa wasn't only populated by giants.
In South Africa, we have these little dinosaurs that are coming up now, which are totally different than anything else we've seen before, too. So we're just beginning to understand these animals, and chances are they're going to turn out to be just as weird and wonderful and bizarre as anything we found in North America.
In this rocky outcrop, Billy de Klerk found a creature that is unique to Africa.
Well, it's from these sediments that we have recently found a very, very important dinosaur here in South Africa. It's a small, meat-eating type dinosaur which is new to science and very well preserved. And we've called this little dinosaur Kirky.
Named after the Kirkwood Formation, where it was discovered, Kirky lived 135 million years ago. A swift, two-legged predator about the size of a chicken, it fed on small lizards and insects. But it cowered in the footsteps of its giant cousins. In the Age of Titans, survival for a dinosaur the size of Kirky could have been tricky. But Billy de Klerk thinks big is not always better. For Kirky, life on the forest floor was a banquet.
Kirky would have taken advantage of the available food supply at the time, and while we were preparing the specimen, we found some lizard material in its gut area, perhaps its last lunch. It was also an opportunistic feeder. It would have scavenged on occasion, and therefore Kirky really was quite content with its food supply. Didn't really need to become a very large dinosaur.
Two dinosaurs from two different worlds, locked in isolation. Why creatures like Kirky were so small, whilst others like Carcharodontosaurus were so big, remains unknown. But scientists are certain the answer lies somewhere in Africa.
we're learning that Africa, of course, as we should have expected, is a very complex place. The north of Africa is different from the southern part of Africa, and these two are in turn different from Madagascar, which just lies off the southeast coast.
Madagascar is an island of magic and mystery. Here, things are not what they seem. 75 million years ago, this world was turned upside down. The island of Madagascar is the land that time forgot. An island of animal misfits. Here, what's common is unusual and often outlandish. These animals and plants are living proof that in isolation, anything can happen.
Islands often are refuges. They're nature's game parks. If you want to go back 30 million years to our own human history, you go to the island of Madagascar, because there are very primitive monkey-like things called lemurs. They're gone everywhere else, but that island served to insulate the lemurs from any new predator.
Like lemurs, most of the creatures that live on Madagascar are found nowhere else on Earth. In 1996, a team of scientists came here hoping that 75 million years ago, Madagascar's dinosaurs were also unique. Joining team leader Dave Krause of the State University of New York is Kathy Forrester, a specialist in prehistoric birds, and paleontologist Scott Sampson. What lured them here is Madagascar's unique geologic history. Before it became an island, it was wedged between 3 continents.
Madagascar was attached to Africa, and it split away from Africa, in about 150 million years ago or so. Although it was still attached at the time to India, and India was still attached to Antarctica, which in turn was attached to South America. Later on in time, in the Cretaceous, 80 million years ago, India broke away from Madagascar, so for the first time, Madagascar was isolated, and all the animals and plants on Madagascar were isolated as well.
Today it lies 300 miles off the southeast coast of Africa, the 4th largest island in the world. It covers an area greater than California and Washington state combined. The team are in the northeast corner of the island, near the town of Majunga. The chances of finding dinosaur bones are high. The ground here is littered with fossils. Already, Scott Sampson has made a discovery.
In some ways, this is about as good as it gets, because we have multiple bones together eroding out of a hill. There is very little in the way of other bones down the hill, so it means that we're not here too late, probably. The skeleton is likely in the hill rather than down the hill. And as you can see, there's not much dirt above the bones here, so it makes it easy for us to get our picks and shovels in here and find out if there's actually a dinosaur buried in this hill.
In no time, the team zeroed in on a number of promising sites and have started uncovering large bones. But these 2 tiny brown flecks found by Kathy Forrester may be the most significant find of the day.
We think we might have at least the wing of a bird in here, and possibly the whole bird. We're not sure. We're going to take this out, bring it back to the lab, and let them tell us.
Fossils of ancient birds are extremely rare and almost unheard of in the southern hemisphere. The first and most famous was discovered in southern Germany in 1861. Called Archaeopteryx, meaning ancient wing, it was half dinosaur, half bird. The earliest example of a creature with a feathered wing, it was a fossil caught in the act of evolution.
Since the middle of the last century, when the Archaeopteryx was first described, it's occupied this unique position as the oldest and most primitive bird. In recent years, there's been a number of discoveries, including the one we've made on Madagascar, which has challenged Archaeopteryx in this position, and we're now starting to shed some light on this very dimly lit area, very important area of evolutionary history.
By 1998, Kathy Forrester finally pieced together her ancient bird. Called Rhehonavis, meaning menacing bird. It lived 70 million years ago during the late Cretaceous. A small predator about the size of a crow, it had a long reptilian tail and a skull lined with sharp serrated teeth.
We found it had a very long tail, which was pretty unusual. And we prepared down both legs, and we found at the end of the left leg this beautiful foot.
At the end of its foot was a large sickle-shaped claw, identical to the claw of a dinosaur, like the famous velociraptor from the film Jurassic Park.
I think it was probably a very good predator, and you can even think of it swooping down on small animals as its prey with these large killing claws and grabbing maybe small mammals, fish, lizards, anything small that it could find. So it's probably a pretty vicious little predator.
Rhehonevis was a bird, but who were its ancestors? The theory that birds evolved from dinosaurs has been hotly debated over a century. If Rhehonevis could fly, it might be the missing link.
I think that it fits in as a perfect missing link. I mean, what more do you need? You have this bird with a long tail and a big raptorial claw, just like Velociraptor, and a number of other features which put it right in with Archaeopteryx. It seems to me to be a very strong link between dinosaurs and birds.
Rhehonevis soared above a prehistoric world little changed in 70 million years. A few miles away from its nest, a river empties into a delta filled with exotic fish. The river lures primitive crocodiles to its shore, while small mammals and lizards scurry through the trees. A herd of hungry dinosaurs is no threat to an airborne predator, but even birds flinched at the sight of another, more sinister monster lurking in the trees. Today, Scott Sampson is on the trail of a primeval serial killer.
One of the most common fossils you find in the field area around here are these teeth with these serrations. We've found hundreds of these teeth, but we haven't found the animal. We've chased all kinds of tails into hills and found nothing.
For weeks, the team scoured the island looking for the missing beast. Then they found another tooth. Removing a slab of rock, Scott spotted a dozen more, all lined up in a row, gleaming in the sun. A few minutes later, he uncovered the lower jaw.
This is about the best thing we could have hoped for this summer. All of us coming out here thought if we can find one thing and one thing only, it will be the skull of Majungasaurus, and here it is sitting right in front of me, so life doesn't get much better than this.
Because fragments of a dinosaur called Majungasaurus had been found here before, Scott thought this was the same animal. But these teeth were longer and sharper. The team had found a totally new creature. They named it Majungatholus. A two-legged flesh eater, 30 feet long, it terrorized Madagascar 70 million years ago. But its most intriguing feature was its skull.
Here in front of me is the skull that we found in 1996, except we've put it back together and we've casted it, and it turns out to be even more spectacular than we first imagined. This is one of the most complete, best preserved dinosaur skulls ever found.
A skull is the most revealing part of a dinosaur's anatomy. It contains 95% of the information about how it lived.
The skull is critical. When you interact with another person, you look at their face. When an animal interacts with another animal, often they look at their face as well. It's a place where we see skulls, decorations, horns. They can tell us a lot of details at the species level.
The skull of Majungatholus is unique, if not bizarre. Its surface is wrinkled and adorned with large bumps, one on top of the head and another at the back. Captivated by this strange creature, scientists think that Majungatholus may be the ugliest dinosaur that ever lived.
So what did this animal do for a living? Well, to answer that question, all we have to do is look at the teeth. This is the lower jaw, and you can see it has these very sharp teeth on it with tiny serrations. This animal is a distant cousin of Tyrannosaurus rex. And it is definitely a carnivore, a meat eater. And what did it eat? Well, chances are it ate those long-necked sauropods that we had running around on Madagascar during that time period. In fact, we found no evidence of any animal bigger than this one on Madagascar in the late Cretaceous, and chances are this beast was the top dog, the big predator at the time. Nothing else would have been there to match it.
The reign of terror is over, but not the mystery. Where did Madagascar's bizarre dinosaurs come from? Who were their ancestors? And when did the continents really split? Like the creatures that live here today, the dinosaurs that once inhabited this island also dared to be different. Madagascar remains as puzzling as Africa, the land from which it came.
Africa is a very exotic continent. It is a dark continent.
From Tunisia on the shores of the Mediterranean, south to the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, this continent is vast and diverse.
Africa is becoming this mosaic of different places that is illuminating dinosaur evolution generally.
Yet so much of Africa waits to be explored.
I know of no other place that has as rich and as widely exposed the treasures of the past.
For the dinosaurs, Africa was the last frontier.